2, 1, and we are going. Mad Man Manson. Who even are you?
Who was I? Because I know who I am now, and who I was fucking just a complete failure in life. Now I'm a slightly less successful failure in life. It's all gone wrong. Fucking terrible. Why'd you start with me of all people? Terrible start. Terrible
Well,
start to your show.
terrible start to my podcasting career talking to you. Well, ironically, the reason I decided to speak to you is that for some unexplainable reason, we're friends. So I thought this first.
Whoa. Let me stop you right there, okay? I'm not going to be a party to this fake news. Are we friends? Let's examine that. Do we hang out outside of this podcast?
Reluctantly, we have spent a certain degree of time together. I mean, I think that it's quite remarkable that we've visited 17 countries in the world together and are yet to still determine whether or not we actually get on.
So sometimes you meet someone and within about 6 or 7 hours, you think, I'm going to be friends with this guy. It's taken us almost 10 to 15 years of knowing who each other were. 17 countries, maybe 8,000, 9,000 miles, and we're still not 100% sure.
Still
I think
not
that's
100% sure.
To be honest with you. It's a bad sign.
No, I know, and I think it probably says something about the more undesirable traits of both our personalities that somehow we just keep crawling back to each other for more.
That nobody else is willing to even see us in the light of day.
Like a dog that returns to its vomit. The artist formerly known as Sebastian Radcliffe always comes back to the artist formerly known as Manson. I'd like to start there, actually, if that's all right. It's a bit cringeworthy. I don't know what you think. Like, do you cringe a little bit inside me referring to you as Mad Man Manson after all these years?
No, because that's how our association started, and that's
right.
But my association with loads of my friends, they know me as Mad Man Manson. It's just a name. So if they were asking me to do a fucking flip bump in the middle of the street, then I wouldn't want to be friends with them anymore. But it's just a name. It's just like a nickname. It's like anything else.
Right. Because I mean, just to provide a little bit of context for my 7 listeners who may not know exactly what we're talking about here.
You're fucking hopeful. Fucking hell, 7. Get the fuck out of here.
Just for people that think I'm just interviewing some random builder in a high-vis jacket, which
I just came from work.
Which essentially, in many ways, I am. Though it would be an insult to call you a builder, but I think this podcast would take quite a quick nosedive if we start on your current career and work back.
Yeah, it would be the most boring thing in the world. That's not the. Here's an interview with a person who works in a workshop. Fuck off.
Just to provide context, obviously, I was a professional wrestler for like 7-8 years from the age of. I started training when I was about 18 and I stopped wrestling when I was about 26. And then obviously yourself, you were a wrestler for. Am I right in saying you wrestled from the age of about 22 to 35 or something like that?
I have zero memory of dates, but it was about 10 or 15 years or something like that. Yeah.
I think at some point in our many hundreds of hours of road trips, I may have recalled you saying you started training when you were 22. But if you're not sure about that, you're really making me doubt myself here.
I could have made it up as well. I do make up quite a lot of stuff, so be prepared for some of that. Yeah, I may never have wrestled at all. There's no video evidence. There's no proof.
I mean, we made friends through wrestling, but like I say, when I asked you if you find it cringeworthy or awkward, me referring to you as Mad Man Manson now outside of the wrestling ring, several years after your career has ended. I think that your response is kind of reasonable when you say, no, it's just a name and it's just how people think of me. Because in our questionable, slowly increasing, something approaching a friendship, I have probably only in the last year or so started thinking of you as Darren. Because after a while, when I was talking to my friends and family, like, oh, I'm going on a road trip with Mad Man Manson again, it starts to sound a bit weird. Who is this guy? So you're now Darren, my Irish wrestler mate. And with all those 3 hit points, Darren, Irish wrestler, everyone knows exactly who I'm talking about.
I think it'll change. So at first it's your wrestling friend, then it becomes your wrestling traveling friend. Eventually, hopefully, we'll just be traveling friends, and maybe in 30 years' time, we'll actually just be fucking friends.
I wouldn't go that far, mate. I mean, that's certainly not something
That's true. That's true.
It's certainly not
Also, there's
something
no way
I'm
I'm,
aiming
I'm
for.
living. There's no way I'm living 30 years. That's just not going to happen. So let's be realistic.
It's not. I look at you a bit. So again, context for the 7 listeners here. We've been to 17. We met through wrestling, and we've been to 17 countries together. And I would like to get onto the travels, but at first, if it's possible, I want to start with a little bit about wrestling. Now, the first thing that I was going to ask you is just how difficult you're going to make my life this evening. But you seem to be playing fairly nicely so far.
So far, it all depends on how annoyed I get at some point. Like, all it takes is if the heating is at the wrong temperature in my room, and I'll just get completely pissed off and fuck up the entire interview. But you're right. I used to be a wrestler. That was my job for about 10 or 12 years. That is what I did for a full-time living. That's how I made my living. That's how I moved to this country. So, as you can tell, I'm from Ireland. I moved here in whatever year it was. And that was how I made my fucking living, just wrestling every single day. And it was fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant job.
This is something I want to ask you, because throughout your wrestling career, and we'll get into that in a sec, but throughout your wrestling career, you had a character that didn't exactly play by the rules. Now, I was trained
I was terrible. Just saying, I was a terrible wrestler.
So no.
All of the people watching, they all know.
No, they don't. See, this is the thing. This is what I genuinely think, right? And I want to say this to you. I don't know if I've said this to you before, but I think that what you brought to wrestling was something that no one else brought, which was genuine, hilarious entertainment. So for the people listening, you were a comedy wrestler, and I saw on numerous occasions you putting crowds of people in fits of laughter for 20 minutes without even doing a move.
Well, first off, 20 minutes. I don't know about that. That's just scaling it. But you're right. That was my job, was comedy wrestling. And at the time, there was fuck all people doing comedy wrestling on the British scene, which is my scene. And it was like, I stole stuff from Japanese dudes and from old British dudes who are dead. So once they're dead, I can steal their souls, use all their shit. And it was fucking great because I was the only one really doing it at the time, which made me stand out. Either good or bad, didn't matter because I was the only one. So it was pretty handy to be the only comedy guy. It was easy because it didn't hurt my body. It was fun to do because making people laugh is fucking fun. And it was challenging because it was just, you had to do something a little bit different. So I was an actor who was just playing the part of a wrestler. That was how I did it in my head.
And you were amazing at it. You make jokes and you put yourself down. And maybe even some of the other wrestlers that are more focused on a sort of hard-hitting, technically sound style maybe didn't respect it to the extent that I believe.
Who give me their fucking name? Because now I'm big, I'll go get them.
See, no, funnily enough, I was actually going to ask you that same question. Like, did you experience throughout your career? Because you and I were both comedy wrestlers, so that means we were focused much more on character, much more on entertainment. And in that sense, when we went out to the ring, it didn't matter so much the quality of the actual physical wrestling encounter. It was more just about letting our characters shine, putting smiles on people's faces, and generally providing something different from other people in the card. And I think it's something that a lot of people in wrestling say, which is that you look at wrestling like a variety show, like the circus, right? So you've got the lion tamer, you've got the juggler, you've got the acrobats, and you've got the clown. And when you go to a wrestling show, every match needs to be a little bit different. So you might have your tag team match, you might have your ladies match, you might have your big guys and your flippy guys. So where did you see yourself in the natural order of things as part of that variety show?
When I first started training, I didn't know anything about wrestling. So I came from a totally different angle to, I think, everyone else I know. I went to training because a friend of mine who liked wrestling didn't want to go on his own. So I literally went as moral support to my friend. At the point I went to training for the first time, I didn't know any wrestlers. I knew who Hulk Hogan was. I knew who The Undertaker was. I knew who Big Daddy was. And that was literally my level of knowledge there. I was completely alien. I knew what pro wrestling was. It's, big guys slamming each other and it's fake. That's what I had in my head.
Would you say that was the equivalent of someone going to a singing class and all they know about singing is that they've heard of
Britney Spears or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It was so you went there completely essentially knowing nothing.
Yes, there's like a completely out. I knew what pro wrestling was. In my head, I saw Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker wearing big, colorful outfits, bashing each other, having American accents. That was my level of knowledge of what wrestling was. I had
Yeah.
zero idea that independent wrestling existed. So I
Mm.
knew WWE and I knew fucking World of Sport because it was on telly. That's the two things I knew. There was no way I could think to myself, well, there's normal people, normal human beings like us doing this at the weekends. That
Yeah.
did not come into my head that existed at all
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah. So you knew absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because something that I often think about wrestling is how there's just literally nothing like it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
bizarre.
It is. It's fucking completely weird. And the more you get into it, the more fucking weird it becomes.
It's a very weird thing. And it's very hard to explain to someone that doesn't know anything about it.
Yes.
So for you to have actually, because most people that go to professional wrestling training schools have just loved it since they were a kid. Like, I used to write pages and pages in my diary when I was a kid about wrestling and how much I love wrestling. And I had wrestling posters on my bedroom wall. I had a picture of Jeff Hardy in my wallet. I used to wrestle with all of my friends at school. I had a video camera when I was 12 and we used to jump off ladders into boxes and it was wrestling focused. And I only went off wrestling for say 3 or 4 years in my teen years when I thought I was a bit cool between the age of like 13, 14, 15. And then I just got straight back into it, when I was 18 and I started training. So the reason I want to bring this back around to you is because for you to turn up at a training school, not knowing anything about wrestling and having no preconceptions, surely that education of like, what is wrestling? What am I doing here? Must have been weird coming across this whole genre of pro wrestling at like a comparatively late age.
Yes. So in my 20s, so to say there was a steep learning curve, it's ridiculous. Like I remember my first training session. It was an open day. So that school, the Irish Whip Wrestling School, had an open day where anyone could come and watch training to understand what it was. And I went, and I remember it really well because I saw a guy called Red Vinny body slam Sheamus, who's in WWE now. Right. I saw that happen and I thought to myself, how is that small dude body slamming the big bodybuilder? And it was, to me, it was like, I don't understand how that just happened. So I'll stick around so I can learn about the mechanics of the move.
Okay.
I was just thinking, I know what's happened. They've cooperated somehow to make it happen, but I want to learn how. So as you and I know, posting and placement of your hand and legs, that's what it was. But that was enough to make me go, well, I'll come back tomorrow to see how to do that. Obviously, I wasn't learning body slams, but I wanted to understand how the physical mechanics of it worked.
Right. And I think that's something that a lot of people find interesting in terms of the physical mechanics, because people will ask that very regularly, ask question of, is it fake or does it actually hurt? Questions like that. And it is a bizarre thing in the sense that it's so full contact. And yet you're at very high risk of having an injury. It's very full contact. You do have to be a good athlete and you have to be in shape and look after your body in order to do it. And people don't really understand the mechanics of how all that works, that you're simultaneously sort of doing quite a lot of rough and tumbling, but essentially you're trying to look after each other at the same time.
The worst thing for me with people in wrestling is when they try to fight against the word fake.
Right.
So the first thing someone will say is, oh, that's fake. The best answer to that is yes. Of course it is. It's acting, just like Brad Pitt is not really fighting the Nazis or whatever film. I can't think of a Brad Pitt film where he fights Nazis.
That famous film with Brad Pitt fighting the Nazis.
Brad Pitt versus Hitler. I'm just saying, I think that would be a good film. Okay?
I think it would be a good film. What would the title of the film be? We'll get back to that wrestling stuff in a minute.
Brad Pitt versus the Nazis.
Brad Pitt versus the Nazis.
That's all you need to know. Just like wrestling, the clue is in the fucking name right there in front of you. I hate when people fight against the word fake, because fake. I go to the theater all the time. My main interest in life is theater, and I go there and I know the actor isn't the character, but it doesn't matter to me because I'm being entertained by it. I'm hearing a story. It's making me think about my own life in relation to that story, which is exactly what wrestling's doing. I'm not really grabbing your nipples when we're having a comedy match, but the kids are laughing,
and we just save that for hotel rooms in Bangkok.
Yeah, we sent bro down as well. Sometimes I film it in the corner on my phone. That's a different thing. It goes to a lot of voyeur websites. It's quite popular. Yeah, fighting against
But
the word fake. Don't fight against that word. It's a fucking great word.
it's funny you say that. I've always thought the exact same thing. There is a huge feeling of resistance to what that word fake in pro wrestling, but really it's just a semantic game. It's just people getting confused over what the word means. Because if someone uses the word fake as a disparaging comment, and they're saying fake in a derogatory manner to degrade the skill and athleticism that goes into pro wrestling, then I can understand why someone would get offended by the use of the word. But you have to be, if it's fake to degrade it, then it's fair enough to stand up for it. But in terms of you're not actually fighting, that's the point. Of course it's fake.
Yeah, that's of course we're not. Of course. Like obviously that's there. So you're right that if someone's using it as a way to attack wrestling for some reason, that person, you're not going to dissuade them by like trying to convince them it's real. It's just a stupid thing to do. It's fucking 2000 whatever year this is. I forget what year it is. Whatever year this is, everyone is on the internet. We all know the game. The jig is up. You know?
It's been up for quite some time.
Yeah. I don't know. It's the fake thing is weird. It is used as a stick with which to beat people who literally put their fucking necks on the line. Like we have friends who, at a high level of wrestling, who literally that's their whole life, and their neck could be broken tomorrow. And we have friends whose necks have been broken, and they've lost fucking all sorts of life because of that. And the word fake can feel like an attack on them, but it's not. It's just don't rally against it. Take it with you. Use it to your advantage.
I think when someone uses the word fake to describe wrestling, what they're trying to do is to put it down. And I think, but they're trying to put it down in such a way as if to say, because it's choreographed, because they're not really fighting, that for that reason, it's not very good. Right. So what you have to do in order to, that's what they're saying.
It's not very good. 90% is not very good. I don't know if you've ever seen my matches, but 90% is not good. Believe you me.
Well, here's a question. There's two questions I'd like to ask you, right? So the first question is that kind of ties in with what we were just talking about. And then the second question goes into what you just said. So the first question is, how would you describe pro wrestling to someone who doesn't know what it is? You know, someone that you work with or a member of your family says to you, tell me about this wrestling thing then. What is it? What's the most charitable explanation of pro wrestling that you can put forward to someone to convince them that it's vaguely interesting and of value?
Pantomime. Simple as that. One word. So everyone knows what panto is. Everyone knows it's fun. Everyone's in on the joke. There's audience participation. It's mainly for kids, but lots of adults enjoy it as well. And that's what my level of, because there is lots of different types of pro wrestling, but what I did in wrestling was mainly for kids, but I tried to do it in a way that adults enjoyed it too. That was my stock in trade. Like, because there are lots of different types of wrestling. Some totally unsuitable for kids and some totally for kids. But my one was exactly that, just pantomime. That's the word I'd use to tell my boss if he ever asked what wrestling was. I'd say it's panto.
I do think it's something that's quite hard to understand for people that have never watched it before. It's really one of those things. It's like, if you know, you know. If you're in the club, you're in the club. If not, you probably might not get it.
Yes, I think that's true. I also think that is both the best thing about wrestling and the worst thing about wrestling. Because the best thing is a sense of camaraderie you have with your fellow wrestlers. You become bonded with them super close. You become best friends with people quite quickly because you are physically touching each other. You're physically hitting each other, all those things. And you're traveling and all that bullshit that's with wrestling. It brings you together. But it's also, it tries to be cloak and dagger. It tries to be clandestine. It tries to be the secret society, and that's the bit of wrestling that can be really dangerous and can be really shit sometimes. So its strongest suit is its mysteriousness, but it's also the worst thing about wrestling is how mysterious it is.
Yeah, and I think also, like, if we're being completely honest, not to just kind of criticize the industry in which we have a lot of friends in, and that we obviously spent a lot of our lives in.
Let's criticize that shit. Fuck those
let's
guys.
criticize it. I mean, let's be honest. Let's obviously say exactly what we think. I mean, I was obsessed with it when I was growing up. I loved it as a teenager, and I spent half of my 20s doing it, and I still have a certain amount of love for it. But you know, I do scratch my head about it sometimes. I get nostalgic over it, but it's a strange one. It is a strange one. And to your point, what you just said, about the sort of clandestine sort of cliquey aspect of it. I think all industries have a tendency to get cliquey.
Yeah.
I think all industries, especially sort of arts and entertainment industries, I think have
that's very accurate.
You get your inner circles and you get your snobbery, and everyone's kind of on the same. There's a closeness, right? Because you're all doing something niche together. And then there's a competitiveness because you're all essentially competing against each other. So it's a weird kind of, I think all industries get like that, but I think because wrestling is kind of, it's still got that, it's much more professional these days, in fairness, but there's still that undercurrent of that carnival vibe. So,
well, wrestling, one thing is kind of weird because everyone on the show is an independent contractor. That's the way at my X level of indie wrestling. That's the weird thing about it. There's nobody there who actually really works for the company. So everyone's an independent guy. So everyone's looking after themselves first and foremost. They have to pay rent or pay whatever they want to pay. So it's kind of a weird thing that usually you'll have 2 or 3 contractors in a normal company, an electrician, a plumber, whatever. But with wrestling, every single person in that locker room is an independent contractor. And that's kind of weird because we're all against each other because I want to make more money than that guy, or I want to be on this show next week and I don't care about this guy. So that's a kind of weird thing that goes on in wrestling that people from the outside wouldn't understand.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of things that from the outside people might struggle to understand. One of them that I was thinking of earlier that I'd like to touch on is that you and I, we came from very different groups in pro wrestling. Very, very different sort of backgrounds, if you will, because when I first started wrestling and I first started spending time with people like Pete Dunne, Mark Andrews, Gavin Watkins, who's obviously Flash Morgan Webster, Ryan Smile, rest in peace, Eddie Dennis, Hitch, all those guys. We were like the young guys, we were like the young blood up and coming. Yes. I'd heard of you for a couple of years before you had any idea who I was.
What did you hear about me? Was it good or bad? What did you hear?
Well, it wasn't like it wasn't like that. It was more just like you guys were the mainstays of wrestling. There was the names such as like Mad Man Manson, El Ligero, Dave Mastiff, Chris Travis as well. Just people like that were people that you guys were on the bigger shows. You were more well known, and you were just like a few years ahead of us in the evolution of pro wrestling. But we also, I think, the two groups had very different philosophies as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember I talked to Mark Andrews about this ages ago because we did a T-shirt swap one time, which was cool. And his philosophy and your gang's philosophy was always about giving 100%, no matter how many people were there. So that was one of the things. No matter how many people are there, you give 100%. You work your ass off every time. Whereas my philosophy was always the opposite of that, which is you work harder if there's more people there. And if it's a shit crowd, you do a half-assed job. That was 100% my philosophy. Was, well, if there's only 20 people there, I'm going to do fuck all work for them. But judging by how far your philosophy or your guy's philosophy has taken them and how far my philosophy took me, it's clear that their philosophy is correct. For example, Pete Dunne is on top of the world, like literally top of the world. The guy is one of the best wrestlers in the world, and I work in a warehouse. So to say that my philosophy is better than his is completely fucking wrong. Their way has got them way further than me.
Well, I think that's true. But I also think it was a sort of there was a sort of changing of the guard and a changing of the culture as well, because you guys were adhering to a philosophy which you had been taught. You were adhering to a philosophy which had been true for a very long time. Yeah. And that's the way that wrestling had been. And you know, that there are and were still a lot of valid criticisms of the sort of indie spot fests, if you will. But because everyone started doing them, the culture of wrestling completely changed. So it was like, who's to say if your philosophy hadn't continued that it may not have been better overall? I mean, maybe I'm just speculating here, but the point, the culture changed is what I'm saying. The culture changed.
At some point, I was the up and coming new kids on the block,
right?
So at some point, I was that guy, and I was walking into dressing rooms with guys who were bigger, stronger, older, and had more experience than me. And I was dicking around like an idiot and getting a better reaction than them. So at some point, I was that guy who was, who the fuck is this guy? Why is he coming along and getting more attention than us? So it always evolves and changes. Everything in the entertainment business will always evolve and change every single time.
And this is the thing. This is why we come at this from an interesting place, because although you come from that more old school philosophy, the way that you approach your wrestling matches and your character wasn't old school, because really you were just completely, you hardly played the role of chiseled old veteran. You basically went out there, and didn't really wrestle most of the time and just completely tore up the rule book and maybe even annoyed a few people in the process. So in a sense, your approach was radical and renegade in and of itself.
Yeah, it was. I just found a really weird niche that was really easy to do and made me money and was pretty enjoyable. So why the fuck would I do anything else? That was really the simple way I had things. It was just, well, people are paying me money to do this. They're giving me complete freedom creatively to do whatever the fuck I want to do. So why on earth would I learn how to wrestle when I can just do whatever this is that I do?
See, funnily enough, I had a similar experience to that, though. I spent more time trying to master the spot festy sort of stuff. You know what, actually, it's inaccurate to even call it spot festy stuff, because in a way that does a disservice to it. I think it would be more accurate to say I spent more time just trying to master being good at the physical stuff. I spent more time just trying to be a good wrestler, but essentially I kind of gave up. So we went down that similar path, because I spent a few years doing this Kid Lycos character, and Kid Lycos, funnily enough, made his WWE debut, or at least it was progress on the WWE network recently. So it's quite funny because there's been, I was the first one. I've been wiped from history. So now there's a Kid Lycos 1 and Kid Lycos 2. But really, Kid Lycos 1 is Kid Lycos 2, and Kid Lycos 2 is Kid Lycos 3. But I think Kid Lycos 2 or 3 was on WWE Network recently. And that was quite funny for me, because obviously Nick Woolcock, who's a pro wrestler here in Bristol, he came up with the gimmick. And I was, it was my gimmick to start with. And that was what I did for a couple of years. So it was quite surreal seeing my gimmick, or it hasn't been my gimmick for a long time, of course.
That me? Am I on screen right now?
Have I made my WWE debut, sort
Where's
of?
My money? I know.
Not at all.
But it's always moving.
That was interesting. But anyway, I did that for a couple of years, and I tried to get good at the wrestling. I tried to basically hang in there with sort of Mark, Hitch, Pete, and I would organize matches with those guys as much as often as I could for CSF, which was my sort of local home promotion. Any opportunity to wrestle Mark Andrews or Pete Dunne or Hitch for me at that point was a learning curve. So I really tried to get that. They were the guys that I wanted to be on their level. So I spent a while doing that, but essentially I came across this Sebastian Radclaw gimmick, and the Radclaw gimmick was just so much better than anything I'd been doing previously. And all it involved was going out, ad-libbing and improvising, acting, performing. And at that point, it was like this eureka moment had gone off, and I stopped caring about improving the wrestling. Now, that may have been an error, because if I had hung around and WWE had come along, perhaps my wrestling skills wouldn't have been good enough to actually get booked there. Who knows? So I think that it's probably good if you're in any industry to always try and continue improving at all the different areas. But I don't know if you disagree with that, because your approach to wrestling, obviously you didn't do that.
I don't bother with any of that stuff at all.
You don't?
I had my ambition, which I achieved. So my ambition was to never go further than what I got. I wanted to be a regular in British wrestling and make my full-time living doing that work. And that is exactly what I did. That's as far as my ability can take me, and as far as my ambition can take me. I don't have the drive to want to go as far as the guys have gone. I wanted to be a regular in British wrestling and make a small mark in that place. And that's what I achieved.
You did achieve
I do not have the skills or the want or the ability or anything to do what those guys can do. The WWE guys can do main event matches in front of 80,000 people. I can't even envisage how to do that. I have no idea how you do it.
I don't know, man. I reckon sometimes you put yourself down a little bit, but Hey,
Now,
this is
I know my place is if you give me a workingman's club with 150 people in there, I guarantee you I can be the best guy on that card.
well.
Guarantee you. But give me 80,000 people, I wouldn't have a clue. I have no idea how to perform. No idea.
No, this is the thing though, because I don't entirely agree with what you're saying, right? Because maybe in terms of like the wrestling psychology or the storytelling or the physical side of stuff, but I think at any given time in the last 10, 15, 20 years, in terms of character and promo, you're superior to a large proportion of WWE stars, right? And character and promo is such a big part of wrestling.
Most people in wrestling are afraid of cameras. That is
Right.
100% true. They hate doing promos. Whereas if someone gives me a camera, I fucking love it. I will do 10 promos in a row, 20 promos in a row. I won't let anyone go until I've gotten as much of that character as humanly possible, because that's the easy bit. That's the bit that makes you money, gets you attention, gets you bookings. That's the shit. Don't do the stuff in the ring. Do the stuff. If there's a camera anywhere, get it on you. Get the fucking attention. Who doesn't want that?
There seems to be, to me, and I had this feeling the whole time I was wrestling, and I still have this feeling now. There seems to be a real kind of look. In one sense, I'm sat here like, who am I to talk? You know,
who are you to talk?
Who am I? Who am I to talk?
Who the fuck am I to talk?
Who am I? Who are we to talk? And it's, you know, but there's a real problem with promo and character in wrestling, man. It's not good enough. It really, considering it's so important, it seems like people. I guess what I find interesting, is that people can have very successful wrestling careers and make a lot of money and be well known all over the world without ever being good at what I think is either the most important or at least a hugely important part of the profession, which is the ability to speak and the ability to be charismatic.
But then is that us looking from our point of view?
Well, it is.
Because there are famous wrestlers who cannot do any acting whatsoever, who got way further than both of us combined. Therefore, it's not as important as perhaps we think.
Yeah, but then also, if you look at the wrestlers who are most successful, if you look at the history of wrestling, all the wrestlers that are most successful, it's as a result of gimmick and character. So to me, it stands to reason that gimmick and character. For that reason, so you're looking at John Cena, you're looking at Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, all these big stars. And don't get me wrong, they weren't shabby at the in-ring stuff. But the point I'm making is that if those guys, and we know that they're the megastars in pro wrestling as a result of character and gimmick, then to me, it doesn't stand to reason that people should be able to get so far without having those skills. It seems to me that the wrestling industry would be better if there was more emphasis on that before the physical stuff. But like you say, mate, like this could just be
the evolution. For example, if you watch UFC, those guys are the most embarrassing people in the world when given a microphone. It's fucking atrocious. And that's really fucking popular. So maybe we look at the guys like Hulk Hogan, who was fucking great with a microphone. That's the past. The future is these fucking really shit guys who can't speak on the fucking microphone, but are really cool in the ring. Maybe that's the evolution. It's passed us by, and that's where it's going. It'll come back around. It just moves past us. Maybe people want to see people stumbling over their words with a red light in front of them. Maybe that's what people want to see. I don't know. Ask a wrestling fan.
I mean, I'm also extremely aware of like the context of me saying this as someone that perhaps stopped wrestling prematurely and did rely on character and gimmick. And I'm sat here like, oh, all those people making, all those guys making millions. Nah, mate, can't cut a promo like me. But
even just bring it back down to our level, because I don't know those guys making millions. I'm not in their league ever. But the guys in British wrestling, there were guys who couldn't talk at all to the camera, but were really fucking good at wrestling. And if there was two of them having this conversation, they'd be saying people like us are wasted on a card because there could be two guys who are really good at the physical stuff. Now, as you said earlier, a mix is the best way. The best shows are a mixture of different skills, but we could have an all comedy show, it would be fucking terrible. And they could have an all physical show and it would be terrible to us. but there will be some fans who would love that shit.
Yeah.
So it's just, that's entertainment. It's completely subjective. And some people
Yeah.
might think you're complete shit. Some people might think you're fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in the middle with you. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I suppose trying to come up with an absolutist philosophical idealistic theory for professional wrestling is
never going to happen.
It's a futile exercise.
Completely futile. So, are you saying this interview is over? Are you saying this is futile? How dare you?
I'm saying I think we spoke.
It can't be quantified. It's entertainment. It's in the eye of the beholder.
It is, and I think we've spent hundreds of hours together in countries all over the world, and we have spoken more about wrestling in the past half an hour than in all of those trips combined.
The only reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to help your fledgling podcast, whereas usually I fucking do not like talking about wrestling whatsoever. We might as well get it all out now. The bit that's weird is I don't understand why people like wrestling. That's not honestly, I don't understand what someone gets from watching it. That's not right. That's in no way putting someone down, because I watch the shit I like is I love it, but nobody else would like it. But I don't get. I got some of my best mates are wrestling fans. I don't understand what they get from wrestling. I don't see it. I don't understand it. But they don't understand what I get from watching football. I get a massive buzz from watching football, any football. And they don't understand that. Likewise, I don't understand why anyone would watch wrestling. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me.
So I need to push back on that slightly.
Yeah. The fucking hell, getting serious shit.
Yeah, the glasses are on now. We don't need to get too lost in the weeds. It's not the most important thing in the world, but I've heard you saying stuff like this before, and I believe that you don't like wrestling as much as people that really like wrestling.
Not that I don't like it. It's nothing to do with liking or dis. Right. I definitely don't dislike it. I just don't understand the appeal of it. That's all.
But how can you have had a successful career in it for 10 plus years and dedicated your life to it without still not being able to understand it? I mean, you've been to hundreds of shows and you've seen thousands of fans enjoying it, and you've worked out what you need to do to forge a successful career in it. You've become very entertaining in the ring while doing it. Like, I don't see how that adds up with not being able to not being able to understand why people like it.
So I was a comedian. So I get why people like comedy. So of course, I watch comedy. I watched comedy last night. I love comedy. So I get why people might enjoy Grado or Delirious, who to me were the two best comedy guys ever. I get that, but I don't know why you'd enjoy seeing two big guys slamming each other. I just don't understand. I don't understand, or not even big guys. I understand the appeal of two big muscle men beating the shit out of each other. I do get that appeal because it looks cool. Everything likes things that look cool, but a main event between two normal-looking guys doing false finishes and that was close. It's like I don't understand it. I don't get it. And I guess this is not disparaging at all. This is not putting it down. I just don't understand.
I think it's good to have an honest chat about it, because for all the 7 viewers that do watch this video, I think it's fair to say that if we were still in wrestling, we might not speak about it quite as freely. I know you did in the ring as part of your character, but it might be controversial for two wrestlers to put up a podcast where we're both like, yeah, there's some bits that are good and some bits that are bad. Do you know what I mean? So, but I think a lot of wrestlers probably have these conversations and do think about this stuff, but it's probably not great for your career to talk about it while your career is still ongoing.
Maybe if they fucking were confident in front of a camera and able to speak and articulate their points, it would actually be better. Maybe a lot of people who get into wrestling are quite shy anyway. Like I've traveled around all the training schools. I've done like training classes and shit like that. They're terrible. They're really nobody should ever come to one of my training classes. But I see lots of shy people. They're always there's a certain type of person who comes to wrestling training school, and I'm gonna say 80% of them are really fucking shy. You'd expect from outside wrestling that to be complete extroverts, really over the top people. But almost 80-90% of people, they're super fucking shy. It's weird, really odd.
It's weird. I think it's because wrestling kind of falls into that almost sci-fi nerd sort of comic book thing. Like I never understood that part of wrestling, because there is a distinct kind of crossover between wrestling and things like cosplay, sci-fi,
Yeah,
comic books, that sort of stuff. Like,
that, that's only relatively recent, I would say, in the
right,
history of the job.
right.
Because if you look at the guys who came before my generation, guys like Doug Williams and Frankie Sloan, all those guys, they were, to me, when I came into the job, real men. They were
Mm,
real human beings. And I was like, fucking hell, look at these real men all around the place.
right,
Whereas the people coming into the job now will be totally fucking different. They would be, and again, it's not fair to generalize, but lots more people would be into comic books, into
right.
cosplay, into subculture, or whatever the fuck these words are. I don't even know what these things mean. But into like niche interests, and they
Yeah.
find their tribe with people who are into wrestling. So, but
I,
back in
I
the
think
day, I don't think that was the case.
no, and I think you're right, because I think even from, I haven't followed wrestling like WWE closely in quite a long time, so I don't want to speak too confidently. But from what I know of even the history of WWE, it used to be a little bit more dog eat dog, sort of big characters, blokes, that would go out drinking and da da da, and it was a bit more. It was a bit more like a carnival, whereas now I think it's much more like vanilla, I suppose, in terms of
Yeah,
the
I
yeah,
don't know. I
I,
don't know
I,
about American wrestling, but in British wrestling, that is the change. The
yeah,
people at the 80s and 90s were tough men doing a real fucking job,
right.
and now it's people who love wrestling in the job. So it has changed, and whether it's for good or bad, I don't know. But people loving their job is a good thing. So
People
maybe
loving their
now
job
it's
is a good thing, and obviously the British wrestling boom of the last sort of 5 or 6, 7 years, whatever it's been, has
yeah,
obviously been
massive,
a good
fucking
thing in
insane.
terms of
Never
people
thought,
making money,
yeah,
and
never
earning a
thought.
living. Um,
Yeah,
I think this is just off the top of my head. I reckon the reason that the sort of type of person and the culture of wrestling has changed, I think it could be twofold. I think first of all, I think the culture of wider society has changed. The focus on macho masculinity in wider society is sort of derided a little bit these days.
yeah,
Um,
which sucks for me because that's literally all I have going for me in my personality. That's literally
right.
all I've got. And once that went out of fashion, I was fucked.
Yeah, the idea of being sort of I don't know, it's hard to like too macho or too full of testosterone or too sort of manly or like old school stoic. Like, it's not good to be
Yeah,
stoic. We're encouraged
yeah.
to talk about our emotions, and that's a whole different conversation, and there are advantages to being expressive of your emotions and to stoicism, but
No, nope, nope.
yeah. Oh, I've got
Hard
some
disagree.
oh,
Very hard
don't
disagree.
you worry, mate. We're moving on to a therapy session. I've got it all written out. I've got the list of forbidden questions just in case our talk runs dry.
There's a lot of them.
That's a long old list of forbidden questions.
Very fucking long list.
Very, very long, depressing, painful list. Yeah. So I think that the general culture has changed of society. I think that your sort of kind of salt of the earth macho man is not quite as prevalent anymore.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I also think that I wonder whether um wrestling was far less accessible to the fans back then, even maybe to someone
yeah.
such as myself, because I can't guarantee that if the entrance door to pro wrestling involved um, years of brutal
Well,
sort of
that's I've talked about this one before. Is barriers to entry. There
yeah,
used to be shitloads of barriers to entry. I mean, there was loads of, you couldn't just become a wrestler next weekend, but now there are no barriers to entry. So it's bad because shit people get in, but it's good because everyone gets a chance to try.
mm, mm,
So it's one of those things. It's left hand, right hand sort of thing. You just don't know. Back in the day, you would have had to travel fucking miles to get to a wrestling school. Now there's one in your town, however
mm,
small your town is.
mm.
But the good and bad is, used to be the trainers were good. Nowadays, the trainer is anyone who can afford a ring. That's
Yeah.
the good, the yin and yang. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've read various books like William Regal's book and just other books about the old world of sport days, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you say about barriers of entry. I think like it's now, like you say, anyone can do it, and
Yeah.
why not? I guess that's the same with all other sort of industries, more or less. If you want to learn how to sing, you learn how to sing. If you want to learn how to play football, you
Yeah.
learn how to play football. If you want to learn how to paint, you learn how to paint. But wrestling, because it came from that carnival background, it was much more insular, much more niche. And I also think
Yep.
probably because they had to protect the sport more, And yeah, I think also probably because they actually had to protect the industry more because it was during a
Yeah,
time where there was still a
yeah.
big question mark over whether it's real or not. In order to let someone into that fold, they had to
And
pass
to
quite a
trust
few.
them.
Well,
Yeah,
exactly. They had to trust them, and
because
now
if they gave the game away, they'd lose their living. So they were
right,
literally protecting their own pocket. Like
mm,
that, it's just
right.
it's like a completely different world.
It's a
It's
different
like a
world.
completely different world. The
It's a
guys
different
back
world.
then who wrestled in like 60s, 70s, they were literally doing a job and protecting their pocket by trying to keep it as real as possible. And then 80s, 90s, and the Americans took over everything, and that's how it changed to where it is now. Fuck knows if it's good or bad. It just is what it is. Same as
Right.
every entertainment business.
Right. I mean, yeah, there's no point trying to place an objective truth, an objective value on it about whether it's good or bad. But I would say that considering that wrestling was in such a dire state in this country for so long,
Yeah,
that it's got to be a positive. I mean,
yeah.
there was
It's
nothing. I know when you actually wrestled in the British wrestling scene because when did you start wrestling in England? Or no, when did you start
2004,
wrestling in Ireland? I don't know why I'm choosing to make out
2003
that
or four.
the Irish part of your career not remotely relevant. When
It
did you
means
come over?
nothing to anyone. No,
Spoken like a
2003
true
or four.
arrogant Englishman. Sorry, answer. Sorry. When did you
But you
when?
don't care. You took my country for 700 fucking years. 2003 or four, I think it was.
Right, right. So I started about I guess it was 6 or 7 years after that,
Yeah,
and I spent a couple of years in the drizzling shits of British wrestling, and then it all
yeah.
started to pick up.
I love the drizzling shit. They were my favorite times.
Were they?
They were working for shit promotions is definitely the best.
Mm.
No question about it. I love those really shit halls, really shit rings. Like the changing area would just be the back of a transit. That to me is I look back at it really romantically and
Mm.
see that was a really cool way of making my living for a while.
Yeah.
That's the romantic bit for me. I love that bit.
Yeah, but having been such a fan of wrestling growing up and having read so many autobiographies, the romanticism was a big part of it. You read like
Yeah.
Jerry Lawler's autobiography and Mick Foley's autobiography. They were spending such long periods of time wrestling in front of 2 people, 7 people, and then and Jerry Lawler was
Okay.
Jerry Lawler was hugely successful, obviously, but
Yeah.
he it's like the nostalgia of being on the road and being in these different locations and sleeping in random places and just meeting random people. Um yeah, there's that real nostalgic vibe of wrestling. I don't know if any of that has been lost these days. I'm not sure.
Don't know. Yeah, I wonder why. It's interesting because I think people now who enter the job now look at stuff like WWE, NXT UK and see that as right. That's the level I'm looking to get to.
Right.
Whereas when I got into the job, it was All Star. That was the level I wanted to get to, which
Yeah.
is leisure centers around the country with 500 to a couple of thousand people, and that was the level I wanted to get to. So I thought, like, if you have your own dressing room and a shower, I thought that's fucking wow, unbelievable. We've got an actual shower backstage, whereas like WE level, you got a fucking tour bus and all this sort of shit. I never saw that level as being attainable, but I guess people now coming to the job see that level. So I think my generation will be the last generation to drive into a shit town and see a town hall or a really small workman's club and think, oh, that's a venue. Whereas people now who are training can only see big arenas as venues. So it's an interesting, I'll be the last generation of people to see a hall with 20 chairs in it as, oh, that's a wrestling venue. So it's just a weird thing. That's changed. That's gone. Like people won't see that anymore.
If someone had told me when I started wrestling and I was looking around at all these promotions in the UK, and the first sort of big show I went to, which was big at the time, was an Alex Shane promoted FWA at some Comic Con somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Marty Skull and Mark Haskins were a tag team then or something. And that was as good as it got, for British wrestling then.
It was, yeah, that's it. I was around in those times as well, and they were cool. They were really cool to be part of those shows. Felt like you were part of something big. Like I was part of 1PW, and that to me was fucking brilliant. It was so cool. They were the biggest crowds I'd been in front of at the time. There was fucking just nice lighting and shit like that, just stuff I hadn't experienced before. Whereas when I look at a 1PW show now, compared to the shows that are around these days, it looks a little bit lower rent. But at the time, it was fucking amazing. And some of my best memories were from that exact time and working for promotions like that, who they kind of get derided a bit nowadays. But to me, as an employed person there, it was fucking brilliant. I absolutely love those days.
Yeah, that's something I'd be interested to know. Like, what was, if you were to give a brief summary of the like trajectory of your career? So it was like it started here, and then it went here, then it went here. How did it go from beginning to end? How would you describe it in terms of the skills you were picking up and the different promotions you were working for and your enjoyment of the job? How did it? What was the story of your career?
Super lucky because when I started with Irish Whip, he needed a ring man. And before I was training or before I was anywhere near ready for shows, I was the ring guy. So I got there, I did my first 3-4 sessions and thought, this is pretty cool. Seems like a nice place. These are nice people. I want to be friends with them. I realized that the boss man there needed someone to transport the ring. I, at the time, was driving trucks for a living. I was like, I fucking have trucks every weekend for free if you want them. So I started charging for doing ring jobs, obviously enough. And ring job sounds normal to us, but just remember, if any normal people are listening, they won't like that word. But ring job sounds normal to us. And I was doing ring jobs and just making extra money on that. And then I started wrestling on shows. Once I started coming over to England, I was still living in Ireland, and I was on a thing called the Wrestling Channel, which has kind of been forgotten about in history, but it was on Sky Digital, and they showed Irish Whip Wrestling, which was my home. And I managed to get bookings from that. So I came straight in over here at a decent level. So I didn't have to start at the bottom. I came in at a decent level. So which is kind of weird because I came in and some people knew who I was from watching me on the Wrestling Channel. That's when I developed what comedy was, or what my style of comedy was. I started learning what made people laugh. And then I started forgetting anything I'd been trained and taught and making it up as I went along. If it got a laugh, I did it a second time. If it got a laugh, I did it a third time. That was really me just doing that shit. Then I fell in with guys like Tyson T-Bone, Dave Mastiff, Ashton Smith. These are all my best mates in normal life as well. And that's when I learned the job properly. I got on the camps, and that was the job to me. The fucking camps. That was the job. Nothing is better than that for me.
And then from the camps, how long were you doing that sort of that sort of work for before you started maybe getting more bookings for like going up to Scotland or doing Progress and shows like that?
Yeah. I was doing camps right up to when I quit, pretty much. So that was always what I wanted. And then probably 2-3 years of that, of just doing camps all the time. I was doing normal hall shows the weekend, and then the super promotions of their time, 1PW and RQW, they were doing really good stuff for me as well. I loved working for those places. Again, they kind of got forgotten about these days. But through them, I had some name value, which meant I got booked on regular shows, which meant people who wanted to promote saw me, saw who I was, liked what I did, and they booked me on their shows. And that's when I got into places like Progress, etc.
Mm-hmm. Why did you? Okay, first of all, I was listening to your podcast with Flash Morgan Webster.
Oh, yes.
And you said something that made me laugh, and I completely agree with it. Though I do think I've been guilty of using this term. The idea that people retire from pro wrestling. I mean, obviously some people do retire, but you see people that, and I think I was guilty of this myself, but you see people that are like 24 or something, and they've
retiring.
I'm retiring.
It's just embarrassing. If retiring is an old man who's 65, right, 70 years of age, shaking hands with his boss and walking away, that's fucking retirement. Just quit. Just quit.
There's something a bit marky about it, I would say. It's like
it is. I think so, because I understand people like Ric Flair can retire because he's a millionaire. Hulk Hogan can retire; he's a millionaire. John Cena will someday retire; he's a millionaire. People like us who made fucking 50 quid, 20 quid, 100 quid on shows, you're fucking retiring. Look at me. I came from work. Do I look fucking retired? I find it's a bit of a mark word. I understand because it's the lingo we all speak, but I never understood the whole retirement thing. It seems like you just love yourself. You're fucking made of chocolate.
Do you a bit of a segue here, but You're probably not going to remember because I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I was kind of aware of you before you knew who I was because I was just getting into wrestling and you were one of these names in wrestling that I suppose to some extent that I aspired to be as on that level.
Yeah.
And do you remember the first time that you and I met?
Ooh,
I don't think you do. I think you will be able to. Okay, let me ask you another question. Do you remember the first time that you and I spent time talking and getting on?
oof, no.
Do you really not know?
I remember the time we clicked together was from Ryan Smile. That was the time we clicked together. That was the time we really clicked. But I've got a pretty bad memory of things in general. That is how I see the start of our story together.
Right. So that's correct, right? The first time that we got on was when we worked together in Birmingham for Ryan Smile.
Yeah.
And we spent a good while backstage talking about Andy Kaufman.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. I remember that.
And the rest is history, as they say, because
the rest is indeed history.
We had those two matches, and hopefully the wrestling matches are history, and no one ever watches them.
Yeah, that would be good for us if no one ever.
No, I really enjoyed those matches. I thought they were very funny. I've still got them on tape, on my laptop, on tape.
Okay, how old are we? 1981.
I really enjoyed working with you in Birmingham for Ryan. But the time that we actually met the first time, which makes me smile, was it was for, and this is the first time I ever did the whole shake your hand, nice to meet you. It was for Royal Imperial Wrestling in Port Talbot.
Ooh, yes, fuck it out, really?
Right, yeah, it was, yeah.
Did we wrestle each other?
No. The first time we worked together was in Birmingham, but this Royal Imperial Wrestling show was a match with it had 9 matches on the card.
Of course.
The poster for the event, I think, was missing like a T or an L or something. Not to criticize the fine people from Royal Imperial Wrestling, but
I love those guys. I remember those guys really fondly. I think those guys were fucking brilliant. I working with those dudes.
I remember I worked for them a few times, and I remember it was it really tied in with what we were talking about earlier, like the nostalgia of pro wrestling, of being on the road. Yes. Like you turn up in Port Talbot, which realistically is a place that I may not have visited in any other circumstance whatsoever, and it's quite it's quite a rundown place. I think that it's quite a poor town, and but there's this kind of backdrop of like a kind of forgotten. I don't know if it was a mining town, but like
steel. It's a steel town.
Oh, it was. Okay, so it's kind of got
still is steel.
Oh, it still is. Okay. But it's kind of it's quite a rundown place, but it's got this. It's the incredible backdrop of the kind of Welsh mountains. I don't know if it's the bottom of the Brecon Beacons or whatever it is, but you're in this kind of very Welsh sort of. It's just a place that I'd never been. You know, I mean,
you have no reason to be there other than for some reason we were there to pretend fight.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like that was the first time I remember you and T-Bone were sat there was various different dressing rooms backstage. I think the backstage area had a few different sort of like bits to it. And I remember watching the second match, and it was a 6-man tag team match in which someone interfered in the match with a steel chair and took them all out. And that was the second match of the 9-match card. And I was like, wow, here we go.
Why not? Why wouldn't that be happening?
But yeah, that's the first time we ever met. And then
who did you wrestle? Who did you wrestle on that show?
Do you know what? I was just thinking that, and I can't remember, but I think it might have been T-Bone.
Really?
Maybe. And I can't remember whether I was doing the Radclaw or the Lycos gimmick. I really don't actually know.
No way. That's funny.
But yeah, that's where we first encountered each other. And then, I mean, from then, like I say, I don't know how we've managed to go to and this was outside of wrestling. We've now been to what is it? So Wales, because we met in Port Talbot.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's Wales, England, Scotland. Surely,
no, we've not been to
really
Scotland.
Not. I failed pretty quick there. France, San Marino, Belgium, Italy, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Austria, Luxembourg, fucking
San Marino.
San Marino, Thailand.
Thailand. Norway, Sweden, Denmark.
Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Singapore airport.
Singapore airport. Have we been to Singapore? Did we go to Singapore airport?
Yeah, we were in Singapore airport. We got a subway. Quite nice.
Did I meet someone I knew in Singapore airport?
You put up like a Snapchat or an Instagram or a Twitter. I don't know these things. You put up some kind of social media thing that you were at subway in Singapore airport, and one of your friends was also in Singapore airport, and you met up. I thought you were very continental, very cool for doing that.
And you know what? I have not got the foggiest who it was. I just can't remember.
You're such a terrible friend.
That is bad, isn't it?
That is pretty bad. That's pretty bad. Now they know how you feel that I didn't remember you from Port Talbot.
But yeah, I guess that's more or less it. I think. Thank you for chatting to me this evening. I really appreciate it. It's good for me to look. If I keep doing these podcasts and I keep churning them out, you will have the honor and privilege of being the first ever guest.
Being the first one, but also if it fails, you can say, "Well, I got off to a bad start, mate. You know, it just went really badly." It's like when you go back and watch season 1 of your favorite show, you're like, "What were they fucking thinking back then?" You do that sometimes, but I wish you all the best with it. I have no idea what you're going to talk about with other people. They'll be far more impressive than me, I've no doubt.
Let's just sign this off with one quick conversation. We were meant to do a couple of things last year, which COVID cancelled.
Oh, I know. It fucking killed me. Absolutely killed me. We had so many fucking good shit we were going to do, and it's killed me that we didn't achieve that.
Right. Last year was going to be a pretty spectacular year, just for everyone, for all of the people that are listening. We were going to...
We had 2 trips planned, one of which you had planned, which was motorbike the length of Vietnam, and also calling to Cambodia and shit like that. So pretty standard thing that at first when you presented that idea to me, I was incredibly lukewarm on the idea. I literally said, I was like, yeah, I don't think that sounds like anything I'd be interested in whatsoever. But then we had a day together where we motorbiked around fucking Koh Samui, which was one of the best days of my life. And I completely changed my opinion on your idea of motorbiking around Vietnam to the point now where I'm obsessed that we have to do it. But that's an obvious trip to do. The other trip was slightly more interesting, which was we were going to Malta, Jordan, and Poland. Now, the 3 countries that have never been mentioned in the same sentence before in history. That was the trip I was absolutely dying to do, and I'm going to make it happen again. Whether you wish to come or not, you are coming. So that's really in payment for doing this podcast. You are paying me by accompanying me to Malta, Jordan, and Poland. That's what it requires.
I'll tell you what, mate. I will agree to motorbike. I would agree to motorbike the length of Vietnam with you this year.
Yes.
If you agree to a one-time professional wrestling comeback in a tag team match with me.
Nope. Simple as that. If I ever came back to pro wrestling, it's because I've really fucked up my life. That's the only reason I'll get back in the ring. If I've exhausted every other way to make money, I've sold myself on the street, and I go back to the only skill I once had, which was fake fighting. If you see me doing that, things have gone badly. Anyone listening, all 3 people who are left, and you as my friend, if I come back to wrestling, it's because I've fucked up big time.
And on that note, Mad Man Manson, Darren, it has been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. You're a good friend. I am a better person for having you in my life as someone to chat shit with on Facebook Messenger and occasionally go on very pointless holidays with. So
many more in the future to come, please.
Many more to come. All right, mate. Thanks a lot. And I'll talk to you soon. All right. Take care.
See you in hell. See you later.
See you in hell, my friend.